Autism is a lifelong, complex condition that can impact your social skills, communication skills, and self-regulation skills. It is what they refer to as a spectrum disorder, and that means that it's different in every individual. Common signs for autism or common symptoms are often seen in areas of language, behavior, and then social skills. It can appear in children who have difficulty playing, so they may not use toys in the intended way that they're supposed to. They may struggle to share joint attention with their caregivers or peers when playing. And in our older ages, in elementary age, middle school, high school, it may appear in ways where children struggle to know social rules, where they might not understand turn taking or differences in conversation topics between what I can talk about with a peer and what I can talk about with my teacher. And when we think of language, we have a wide spectrum in language ability. So we may have some individuals who struggle with verbal communication. We can also have some signs of delayed speech. And then we think of behavior, and signs and symptoms of behavior may be restrictive or repetitive behaviors. So we may see some repetitive behaviors in the way that children may say a word or a phrase over and over again. They may flap their hands, or they may spin or jump repetitively. They may perseverate on a certain topic in conversation or have very specific interests that they like to play with or pursue. So when it comes to the medical diagnosis, that's typically done by a medical provider or a neuropsychologist. And that is just an overall picture of the child. So their development and the way that they operate day to day, whether it's social skills, behavior, and self-regulation skills. And that gives us a good view of how they behave and interact at home, in school, and in the community. A medical diagnosis can be used lifelong to advocate for different services for that individual. It can provide insight into the different service areas of need or supports that they may need outside of school. Oftentimes, parents pursue a medical diagnosis because medical diagnoses are often required by insurance to cover some of these services needed outside of school. So an example of some services family members often pursue are applied behavioral analysis or behavior therapy services, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy. And then we have some families who prefer the medical diagnosis because they can get insurance coverage to help cover the cost of therapy services or some prescribed medication. If one provider or one neuropsychologist doesn't necessarily fit that or deem that your child fits into that autism category or diagnosis, they may help to point you in the direction of other resources or other providers who may be able to help meet the specific needs or signs or symptoms that your child is showing. The biggest difference between the medical diagnosis and the educational eligibility is how autism impacts a student in the learning setting. So when it comes to educational eligibility, that will be determining whether or not your child qualifies for special education services. So even if they are provided with an autism diagnosis, that doesn't necessarily mean that they qualify for special education services. And in fact, that can happen that your child may be diagnosed with autism, but they're not found eligible to receive special education services. So educational eligibility is an assessment that is done with the school team to determine what areas your child would benefit from more support from. And those children who qualify, supports that are provided through the school district can support the child as long as they're enrolled in school. So once the child exits school, those supports are no longer provided. If you don't necessarily fit the eligibility for the educational services, that's where you can touch base with advocacy programs such as Stone Soup Group to learn your options as a parent and how you can maybe get other supports in place for your student. There are multiple supports that families can pursue, whether that's through the medical system or the school system, or you can pursue both. It's oftentimes that families will pursue both the medical diagnosis and educational eligibility at the same time. It's really based on what works best for the family and their child and their individual needs. The common goal, or the goal for both educational eligibility and the medical diagnosis, at the end of the day, is just to access more services to benefit your child the most. An autism diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that your life will be any less or your child's life will be any less. It just may mean that there may be some bumps in the road with certain aspects of that daily life. But because it's being celebrated and there's more resources available today, it's can be very comforting for families to know that they're not alone and that there's different organizations and agencies out there to help kind of navigate the diagnosis process and what comes afterwards. Another thing that we like to tell parents too is that during an evaluation or an assessment, whether it's for autism or any other disability, is oftentimes it's a very long day of hearing maybe about what your child can't do or difficulties that they have or concerns with their development. So it's really important to just take a moment and focus on the strengths of your child and remind yourself that although there are things that maybe my child can't do, these are some amazing things that my child can do and some of their strengths.